How do we know in which matters we should imitate what the Rebbe does?
I heard once that the Rebbe commented about the fact that the Bochrim are constantly imitating her husband. So she observed, let them start with the not eating and the not sleeping, rather than the other things. We imitate the Hanhag of the Rebbe in oftentimes very superficial things. And the deep and meaningful and serious things we obviously cannot duplicate, that cannot imitate. I'll give you some thoughts. The first thought is that it's known by the Rebbe Rashab specifically. The Rebbe Rashab used to say, quote, I don't like the fact that people imitate me. And he was very irritated when people imitate him. And he felt that it was chitzonius. But then there's a story, which the Rebbe himself related, that the Rebbe Rashab used to do Netilas Yadayim 3 times. With wash for bread, each hand 3 times. This was, of course, what we do because of him. Al Pi Halacha, you have to do it only once. Elach, you didn't do it twice, and we do it 3 times. And in the Hayom Yom, there's actually a source for it, a Nigla, from Hagos Ashri, someplace, that you have to wash 3 times. There's a famous story where the Rebbe Rashab was once asked why he washes each hand 3 times, and he says, if I'm doing it, it has a source, I can't remember my source at the moment. So there were 2 Chassidim who watched the Rebbe Rashab wash each hand 3 times. And of course, they didn't know the custom. And they imitated the Rebbe Rashab. One was a simple Jew who did it lafit tumei. He didn't have any deep intention. So if the Rebbe does it, then it's right. I'm going to imitate it. And the Rebbe Rashab told him nothing. And the other was a deep pnimiistic chassid. And the Rebbe Rashab said to him, "From van vesa the house by them. How do you know you're holding by the level to wash each hand 3 times?" And the Rebbe would often quote these 2 stories and bring out the point that it depends on the level of a person. To imitate the Rebbe is ridiculous because we're not the Rebbe, and there's many in Yom that the Rebbe does not pick up. All those things the Rebbe does, we don't even know what we're watching, and if we can't even imitate them correctly. But if you're a big chassid with great intentions, the Rabbi said, how do you know what you're up to? A simple Yid who's pasha doing what his Rebbe does, that's sincere, it's simple. And like the famous Gemara that the Rebbe would always quote about Aida the Nafek Mipuma de Rav Kana, right? That the din is that Hadassim, a Hadas has to be a Mashulish, right? A Hadas is one of the 4 kinds you use in the Lulav, has to have 3 leaves coming out of each point in the stalk. Rav Kana held that the Hadas Pashat is kosher. Even if there's Trei Echad, 1, 2, and then 1, the 3 leaves are not in the same point, it's still kosher. So the Gemara says that the Talmidim of Rav Kana went out of the way to use a Hadas which was not a Mahud. And people said to them, even Rav Kana agrees that a Meshulish, that a Hadas which has 3 leaves coming out of 1 point is better than a Hadas which doesn't. And their answer was, our Rebbe said it, that becomes our Hidur Mitzvah. Our Rebbe gave this kulos, this becomes our Hidur Mitzvah. The idea of imitating, doing what your Rebbe did has that property. Since my Rebbe does it, since my Rebbe said it, it becomes something which I would like to do. And that's the basis. Now the Rebbe, our Rebbe, clearly has a different idea from the earlier Rebbeim. And it's clear that the reason he had a different idea is because there's a different generation. And in the earlier generations, the Rabbeim's philosophy was Chabad, Mont, Pnimius. You have to be holding by what you're doing, and you can't just do what you see and imitate and so on. Our generation has a philosophy of life that says Chatei v'achel, Chatei v'ishti, grab and drink, grab and eat. Like for example, Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. The Chassidim of earlier generations were far more worthy than wearing Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin than we are. And now, Bar Mitzvah boys, pre-Bar Mitzvah boys are immediately wearing Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. And the reason is because in our times we don't look at it in terms of what level you're on. We look at it in terms of if you do a good thing, why not do it? And this applies also to the idea of imitating minhagim that the Rebbe does. Let me give you an example. The Rebbe on Sukkot during Hallel would put the esrog down. And he would pick it up only for the nanuim, for shaking it. In Tafshin Memches, the Rebbe said a very interesting thing. He said, all the years that I watched the previous Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, on Sukkot, his hands shook, his hands were trembling. And I saw that the previous Rebbe would put the esrog down and only pick up the esrog for the nanuim. And before he would put it back down, he'd actually look to see if he had scraped the esrog. So the Rebbe indicated, I wasn't sure whether the fact that the Rebbe puts the esrog down and picks it up only for the nanuim is because that's the minhag, or because since his hands shook, and he was afraid that if he would hold the esrog in the lulav too long, he would scratch the esrog and it would affect its hadar. That's why he put it down. But the fact that this is what the Rebbe did, this was the minhag Chabad. So therefore, in Tafshin Memches, the Rebbe made an exception to a rule. Shnas Hakel, the Rebbe held the lulav and the esrog together the whole time. Now I'm not saying I know the secret, the code. What I am saying is that the Rebbe implied that it's possible that there's a minhag that we have based on the fact that some Rebbe in an earlier generation had trembling hands. Because his hands shook, he didn't want to hold an esrog. That became the custom. Even if a person is young and healthy and vigorous, his hands don't shake. This is the idea that you imitate the minhag of the Rebbe before. So sometimes minhagim come from all kinds of different places, but if this is the minhag of the Rebbe, this becomes our minhag. Now, addressing the question directly, when and when not to imitate the Rebbe. So here also there are rules. There's a series of letters, of exchanges between the Rebbe and Rabbi Yankov Landau, which are very interesting, about Tkiyah Shofar. The Rebbe wrote a letter to Yankov Landau. It's printed in Nigris, to describe to him how the Rebbe Rashab did Shvarim, I believe. And Yankov Landau tells the Rebbe, in return, that what the Rebbe Rashab did was the Rebbe Rashab's business, and we have to do like it says in Shulchan Aruch. So the Rebbe asks him again, I'd like to know how the Rebbe Rashab did Shvarim. So again he tells the Rebbe, it's not our business. And the Rebbe asks him a third time, and the Rebbe says, Sof, I want you to tell me how the Rebbe Rashab did it. And he explains himself. The Rebbe Rashab did it in public. And he was yoytze everybody with the tkiyas. So certainly what he did in public and being yoytze everybody with the tkiyas is something which is negate to everybody. And the implication is that when a Rebbe does a hanhaga, a certain minhag, consistently, always the same way, in public, that becomes the minhag Chabad. There was one minhag one way, and then later on there's a minhag a different way. If the Rebbe is consistent with how he does the minhag, that becomes the minhag Chabad. If a Rebbe does every time something different, you can't imitate that. And I'm going to give you an example for each. In our Siddur, in the davening by Moedim, there's a Vav, Vehamerachim, on Shabbos and Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh. You say Hamerachim, Atev ki lechalu rachamecha, Vehamerachim ki letamu chasadecha. So during the weekday, it says Hamerachim without a Vav. Shabbos and Yom Tov and Musaf and Rosh Chodesh, it has with a Vav. When the Rebbe lost the Rebbe in Tafshin Memches, the Rebbe changed the minhag. That whenever there was no Tachnun, he said Vehamerachim. When there was Tachnun, he didn't say Vehamerachim, and there was no Tachnun. The Rebbe used to ask Rabbi Grona before davening is there a Chassan, and this is brought down in Rabbi Raskin's Siddur, in the footnote. If he knew before davening that there's a Chassan, he would say Vehamerachim with a Vav. If there was no Chassan, he would say Hamerachim. So, in the earlier years, the Vehamerachim was only said in Shmoneh Esrei that have 7 brachas. A bracha that has Shmoneh Esrei has 19 brachas, whether you say Tachnun or don't say Tachnun, you don't say Vehamerachim, and then the Rebbe changed it. So it becomes a new minhag. And the Rebbe was very consistent about it. He always did it the same way. And because he always did it the same way, that becomes the minhag. On the other hand, and this is my personal feeling, the way the Rebbe used to move his head by Birchas Kohanim, when he did Duchen, Chazar Sashatz, every time was different. There was no pattern. Nobody could tell me they know how the Rebbe did Yivarach Hashem v'Yishmerecha. Every tefillah was different. Every tefillah was different. So each time the Rebbe is doing it, he's doing it different. How can you imitate it? If you can't imitate it, then you have to do what it says in Sefer HaMinhag. So the point is, in our generation, there's no question that if the Rebbe does something but Rabbim consistently, if he does something in the privacy of his own room, it's none of our business. But if the Rebbe does something publicly, consistently, that becomes our minhag. But the key is that he has to always do it the same way so that you can actually learn it.